Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsay, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. If you're a regular listener of SuperPsyched, you may have noticed that many episodes relate to what I consider the most important place for us to give energy in our lives, our relationships. Yet there are so many ways to address our relationships, and it's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. While there are some generalities and rules as they relate to virtually all relationships, each relationship needs different interventions and attention. This is why I have several world-leading experts weighing in on the topic. And one of my favorite people in the business of relationship improvement is none other than my most esteemed colleague, Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Alexandra is a psychologist, prolific author of top-tier books about relationships and sexuality, a professor at Northwestern University, and a TEDx speaker. And if that's not enough, she was also called by Masterclass to teach the Masterclass on relationships. I have been a fan of her work for a long time, so to sit down and have a thoughtful conversation with her left me feeling like a proverbial kid in a candy store. One of the books we talk about is Loving Bravely. I listened to that book and loved every second of it. The other outstanding book we talk about is Love Every Day, in which she gives a relationship tip for every day of the year. Simply put, Alexandra is a giant in the field of relationships, and you will derive many takeaways from this episode. So listen in as Alexandra and I talk about what it means to love bravely every day of the year. Dr. Alexandra Solomon, who has asked me to call her Alexandra, welcome to SuperPsyched.
Thank you, Dr. Adam. It's so good to be here with you.
My gosh, and please call me Adam. When I find myself sharing material with my wife as I'm reading the book, that is my top indicator that I am absolutely gaga for what I'm reading. And I just cannot endorse your books enough. Loving Bravely, brilliant title, brilliant interior. Every second of listening to it on Audible was joyful. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you have at least two other books that I know of, but I'll reference one of them, Love Every Day, where you literally go through every day of the year, a snippet to consider in this multifaceted thing called love that is, to my estimation, the biggest generator of our well-being in life. That is the thing. Fabulous. Just banger after banger. Anyway, let's get into why is it that love is so crucial to our well-being from your vantage point?
First of all, thank you for your feedback. I put that right into my heart. I love the idea of you and your wife talking about what you read. And that's always my hope, is that I can just kind of plant seeds that then lead people to kind of cross that bridge and make use of that idea or that insight or that perspective in their own lives. That to me is what it's all about. Why is love so crucial? Well, it's hardwired into us. We know that. I always think about the research from Harvard that I know that you also love, where it's just the longevity research, where they looked at every metric of what makes a life well lived. And they kept coming back to the same darn thing, which is it's the quality of our relationships. And I think there's something about this moment where there's so much polarization, there's so much fear, there's so much change, there's so much information. I feel like we got to come back to our relationships. That to me is so anchoring, is that how can our relationships be places where we get to exhale and just come back to what we know to be true, which is my nervous system quiets when I'm with you, when I'm near you. That's more important than ever in this moment.
I couldn't agree more. In this moment in particular, where there is so much binary polarization and the refusal to consider nuance, and so much of what you reiterate throughout your books is that love is a multifaceted thing. It's not just one thing. And sometimes when we're married to the same person for 60 years, we go through multiple marriages with that same person. And if we're willing to evolve with that relationship, and I think that's one of the key aspects you speak to, just the idea that it's not just a single thing. One of the things that you also said that just made my heart and brain smile was the erroneous conclusion that some people come to of saying, I don't believe in couples therapy. And your retort to that made me laugh. Can you just talk about this notion of, I don't believe in couples therapy?
I don't believe in couples therapy. What my retort is, it's not Santa Claus. It's not the Easter Bunny. Like, it's not like it exists if you believe and stops existing if you don't believe. Like, we're out here doing the thing, you know? Yeah. I think we've made so much headway in terms of destigmatizing individual therapy. You know, I think about when I trained back in the 90s, therapists were sort of shrouded in secrecy and shame. And I think about now how people are quoting their therapists at brunch with their friends. And I love that. But I think that there still is some resistance and fear and shame and stigma around couple therapy, probably for a few different reasons. I think it's these, I call them the Disney did us dirty ideas, these ideas that if it's work, it's wrong. If you know, this person is the one. So I think that the idea of couple therapy, that this thing needs to be cared for, like needs to be worked on, feels antithetical to those romanticized notions. And I think it also is just freaking scary. I think there's a lot of trepidation about being wrong. You know, to go back to your idea about the binary, I think people's notion of couple therapy is either this couple therapist and I are going to teach my partner why they are wrong.
Yes.
Or it's, I can't go in because I'm going to get told that I'm wrong. It's either this rubbing of the hands, like, okay, like let's work on my partner. Or it's this dukes up. I feel like I'm going to be whatever. This therapist is going to be like judge, jury, and executioner. And so that's also a false idea, because any couple therapy worth its fee really is helping two people look in the mirror and really figure out, how do each of us keep growing in the context of this relationship?
And I think you just named the basic fear that everyone has before beginning couple therapy. It will be one of those two realities when I'm in that seat. And that's not how good couple therapy works. Yeah. Can you describe couple therapy just in a general sense so that a listener who has been kind of on the fence, maybe not yet ready on stages of readiness to enter couple therapy, but what would you want to disabuse people of, and what would you want to reassure people of, or not necessarily reassure, but let them know, illustrate?
Well, first of all, what I would say is don't wait until you are 100% ready. It is a bit of a faith walk. And then the thing I also say is go to couple therapy the first time your partner brings it up, because that's my hardest thing. I oftentimes worry when it is a straight couple and he's the one making the call. I get a little worried because I think, oh shit, are you making the call because your partner has been asking you for a year, 2 years, 5 years, and now she's looking at some ultimatums on the table, or she's done a little bit of digging into divorce, God forbid. And Gottman's research backs this up, is that in a straight marriage, by the time the husband says he's unhappy, she's really far gone. So to the husbands who are listening, if your wife has said, or to anybody who's listening, if your partner has said, I think we need some help, go the first time, because it's just easier than if your partner has built up this brick wall that now we got to spend the first 6 months of therapy figuring out how to make a little crack in this brick wall and get your partner to peek through the crack in the wall. So that's one thing I would say. And then I think the bottom line is that your intimate partnership is one of the most potent catalysts of growth and evolution that you're ever going to get in your life. So for you to sign on to couple therapy, it's going to grow you. And just the same way you hire a personal trainer to work out, or financial planner to work on your finances, to hire a couple therapist is to say, this investment we're making matters so much. This experience we're having with each other teaches each of us so much. So why wouldn't we optimize it, learn, create opportunities for healing within this thing we've said we're committed to?
I love that so much. And the word commitment.
Yeah.
and bravery. And the fact that you chose the title of Loving Bravely, let's talk about that in the context of one's willingness to sacrifice some elements of self, so to speak, for the betterment of us.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the components of loving bravely as you see it, just in a general sense, and maybe even towards initiating and being willing to engage in couple therapy?
Yeah. You just use the word sacrifice, which I think it's so true. I can't be as agile in my life because I am part of a marriage, right? There are things that I can't do in the way that I could do if I was single. So we don't do anybody any favors by acting like that isn't the case. But my gosh, I feel like there's a whole bunch of pushback that people have about the idea of sacrifice. It scares us. It scares us because it feels an awful lot like losing ourselves.
I just had this image of kind of a hedonistic marriage. The idea of I'll marry you until it becomes inconvenient and then I'm out.
Sure.
And that is not a commitment. That is not a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that at the heart of the brave component, because I love that you include brave, because it requires bravery. I love the Eric Fromm quote, something along the lines of love is not a feeling. It is a discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he gets it right. And Disney did do us wrong by giving us this idea that passively you find your match and it's all good. You happily ever. No, the day-to-day requires some work. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. And we may need to go into couple therapy at some point. And I'm a big fan of it. We're not getting political here, but Barack and Michelle Obama mentions it in Becoming, that she and Barack have engaged in couples therapy to the betterment of their relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that was wonderful.
I cite that all the time. I'm like, listen, y'all, if Barack and Michelle don't have it worked out, why would any of us think that we've got it worked out? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Todd and I have been in couple therapy off and on over the almost 27 years of our marriage. And it's confronting and it's scary. And it's also a really, really important resource.
1,000,000% agreed is all I can say.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you're forthcoming about that. My biggest return on investment in my life has been the times that I've been willing to double down and invest in my relationship with my wife in whatever form.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
No question in my mind.
Yep. When we were talking before about this idea of sacrifice, there's a lot of research that indicates that our relationships change us. I believe, and I'm sure you believe, that the self is relational, that we don't exist in these nice, neat little silos, that we know ourselves in the context of our relationships and that we evolve in the context of our relationships. And one of my favorite pieces of research comes from Eli Finkel at Northwestern. He did longitudinal research where he was prospectively having people do a measure of self-concept clarity, knowing that some subset of a sample was going to go through a breakup as the study evolved. And sure enough, there was a subset of the population in his study that went through a breakup during the course of the study. And what he found is that in the course of the breakup, those people's self-concept clarity scores tanked. This idea of, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't feel like myself. What do I really like? What am I into? And I love that finding, A, because it validates the freaking heartbreak of relationship endings. And B, it validates how much we know ourselves in the context of our relationship. So when we lose a relationship, there is this disorientation and feeling like not quite ourselves, that's the level at which we're talking about the power of intimate partnerships. So I think when people say, I'm afraid of losing myself in my relationship, there's some truth to that. And I think it is a question that couples have to figure out is how do I pour into this relationship in a way that feels like it expands who I am rather than where I lose who I am, because I can't be there for you if I don't know who I am. All those questions are just the stuff of loving and being loved. And there aren't these easy, quick, obvious answers that sometimes the folks on TikTok want to offer us.
Oh my God, yes. I love simple answers to complex questions. I mean, give me a break. It's not going to be quality. It will be less good than the worst thing at the dollar store. And as you're talking about losing oneself in the context of couplehood, I remember when my wife and my relationship was just budding and it kind of came to that crossroads of, do we move forward and do I move in? I was living in a bachelor pad. that had all blank walls except a photo of my great-grandfather in an army uniform. And I had cans of stuff that I would microwave. I was a total bachelor, dude. I had a cat and pretty great, all sense of control of my life. And the idea of merging with another and losing myself in that context was terrifying. And then what I experienced was, sure, there are some sacrifices here, but the geometric growth was so ridiculous. If I was to use Brady Bunch images of me before versus me after, no question, me after, way better version of me. She became a multiplier. She was not a subtractor. She was not a divider. She has been a multiplier.
I had teach this undergrad class at Northwestern called Marriage 101. And one of my undergrad guys that I taught this quarter said basically what you're saying. He was in kind of his first serious relationship. And he's like, I feel myself changing in this relationship, but every change that I'm making, I feel really good about and really proud of. And I feel like I'm becoming more me, or at least a me that I like better than the old way. So I love that. I love that. You know, I think what's tricky is oftentimes in a cis hetero context, there's the idea of women growing men up or marrying a project. I like the way that you described it. She didn't make you change. She didn't manage your change,
not at all.
But you stepped into a kind of evolution in the context of that relationship. And that's different. That's different.
I'm remembering listening to a quote from Frank McCourt. One of the things he said in one of his interviews is always show up at various rites of passage, various family rituals, people from your past. So last night I see somebody, a man who'd been married for 60 years to a woman in our life. He lost his wife. So we went to what's called the Shiva in Jewish talk. He'd been with her for 60 years, 21,900 days. I mean, he'd been with her all these days. So his concept of self as he goes through grief is changing dramatically. But I also saw people from my past whom I had not seen in decades. And I feel like I am more myself as a byproduct of having been married to the woman I chose than I was when they knew me last. I'm more me. That's one of the best ways I can define it. I'm more me in the context of this we. There's just no question in my mind. And it's not like I drank some Kool-Aid and I'm like, oh, you know, like some zombie. No, I'm more sentient. Life matters more. Everything matters more. And I feel like I'm more authentically myself. And I remember there was a phrase my wife used, and this is the one that makes me smile every time I think of it. When we were thinking about where we were going to live, she lived in the wine country. I lived in kind of the peninsula, and I could move. She had a private practice going, and where do we live? And she just looked at me and said something that just to this day defines the relationship. She said, if one of us isn't happy, neither of us is happy. And that goes flat in the face against this misogynistic idea of happy wife, happy life. And I think it's misogynistic because it's almost as if you have to appease the woman. That's terrible. And I remember seeing on Roseanne back in the day, Dan just basically dictated to his guy friends, yep, whatever she says. That's been the ongoing philosophy. And I think that is so misled.
Yeah.
Because I think for this context of we to bring out more of me, it's required a mutuality, a synergy. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on some of the perhaps toxic thoughts that kind of circulate? And what would you say instead? Like the idea of happy wife, happy life. I'm just assuming that you probably agree that that's not a great code.
Right. That's a really sneaky one because I do love the idea of men being attuned to women's happiness. I'm here for that. But, it's
sorry. I didn't mean that.
But it's so sneaky because what it does then is she knows she's being placated and managed, and he's creating the conditions for massive amounts of resentment. And what he's saying is, I can't have voice. The only way that I can be in this relationship is appeasing her. And then he feels to her ultimately unsafe because he's not a force that she can press up against. Yeah, I feel like that's a big theme that comes up in my couples work. I've been a couple therapist for darn near 30 years now. And I see, with this hetero couples, I watch how he watches her. I watch how he perceives himself in her eyes and how much he is anchored into not disappointing her. And there's something that is very beautiful about that, but it's too much pressure for her, because then what does she do with her emotions? It creates the conditions for faking orgasms and, a whole bunch of things that ultimately do nobody any favors, right? Because all he's trying to do then is solve the moment. She oftentimes misses that he's trying so much to be pleasing to her because she feels so disempowered. So long way of saying that this happy wife, happy life thing, for sure, it sets couples up for a really unhealthy cycle. And what I want is exactly what you're describing with your wife is mutuality, where people can gently bring each other what feels true for them. This is what feels true for me. And we can say it in a gentle way. We can say it in a kind way. We can say it in a sort of circumspect way of like, I don't quite understand why I'm feeling this way, but this is how I'm feeling. Can we talk about it? And what you're saying also fits with 40 years of Gottman's research, which says basically what all his research boils down to is a happy relationship is when one partner has a problem, both people have a problem. Not in a codependent way, but just like you're saying, you can't have a happy ecosystem if one person is biting their tongue or checked out or.
Yeah. And your work corroborates kind of what Stan Tatkin talks about. He basically says it's a buddy cop film. Each of you has each other's back and that you're a system. And it was funny. I realized, as my hands were full and I was trying to do something, I asked my wife for a hand, and Gottman talks about this all the time. In some ways, we become at moments appendages for each other when our appendages are full. As dumb as that sounds, because the fact is our brains haven't changed in 35,000 years, maybe even 100,000 years, but our surroundings have changed dramatically. And we still require that basic thing of knowing that we're in this buddy cop film and that you've got Todd and Todd's got your back and you've got his back. And there's no question that the we is exponentially more powerful than either of you alone. And this coordination is kind of, I use the word coordinate when it comes to couples. How well coordinated are you? I know it doesn't sound really sexy, but it's a non-sexy term I often use is how efficient are the two of you as a system? Like not sexy, not sexy, but it ultimately is the precursor to much great sexiness.
That's right. Exactly. It's foreplay. It's just getting everything ready to go. Yeah. Todd and I had a conflict last week, and what he shared with me that was most painful for him in our conflict was that I was behaving as if he didn't have my back. And he said, Al, for over a quarter of a century, my heart beats in one direction. It's you. And I was in a shamey spiral, and I was in a whole thing that was about me, and I'm not a da-da-da. And in that, when we are in shame, we can't be also in connection. And so, he could have rolled a red carpet out for me, and I would not have felt like he had my back because I was invested in that moment, or I was lost in that moment in my story and my dysregulation. So I couldn't feel that. But that's what's so painful about disconnection. And it's what's so magnificent about connection. And what we're describing is interdependence. It's not codependence. It's interdependence.
So what's so amazing to me is that no matter how old we get, no matter how wise we become, there is still the potential for, at any second, for a regression. So I work with these, what I call them, bulls in the boardroom, Bambis in the bedroom. They come home to I primarily work with men, and they're often men of great power. They come home to their wife of 30 years, and she's all of 5'2", and he's terrified. Totally terrified. And you're talking about some of the things that get in the way. Shame is a big one. Rejection, the perception of rejection. These things are truly painful, and they cause us to retract rather than to reach out. And what are your top tips for somebody who's in one of those shame spirals, one of those moments of like, oh my God, I suck? And by the way, for the listener, and something that you mentioned in your book, differentiated between guilt and shame. Guilt, I feel bad for what I did. Shame, I feel bad for who I am. Again, I can't reiterate enough, listener. Just get her books. Just get them. They're just good medicine. But even for a seasoned therapist, people ask me, are you beyond that? And the answer is hell no. I will die a work in progress, and there will be a lot in my inbox. And I can regress in a second if something triggers me. One of us needs to be regulated in the moment. But what are your thoughts on that hot mess that we get into when our amplifier goes up to 11 and we feel like, shame, I'm going to retract, or I'm going to go full Cartman and say, screw you guys, I'm going home and, I'm going to scorch some earth. What are your thoughts on when you're in that moment? What are the best things to do?
If we can create the conditions where both people aren't spiraling out at the same time, that's always better to have one. I was truly grateful, and I thanked him later. I was really grateful that he didn't get as lost as I got in that moment. I'm a big fan of pausing. And it's hard because what the dysregulation in our body says is this has to get figured out. More is better. You have to understand me right now. I think it's one of the reasons, frankly, why I think couple therapy is so helpful is there's somebody there to slow you down. The urgency to be understood then overrides our capacity to be understanding. So honoring our bodies. I'm a huge fan of people having difficult conversations while they're going for a walk. I think it takes the temperature down because you're not sort of like staring in each other's eyes. B, you are walking in the same direction. So you have a sort of shared perspective anyways. C, your bodies are moving. So you're not going to get into that stuck, frozen response. And so just honoring, like when we are dysregulated, we basically become idiots. We become myopic. We say shit we got to then clean up later, So I'm a big fan of briefer, separated conversations and pausing when we've crossed that threshold, because all the research backs this up, that even couples with very high relationship satisfaction scores, once you've gotten them triggered, it's real hard, if not impossible, to come back to center in that conversation. You need a break, space, silence, a glass of water, a shower, something, and then to come back in again. So trusting that we can pause and come back together. I think that's a really big one.
You just dropped something so big and so immediately useful and so valuable. The idea of the pause and let's walk. Mm-hmm. Possibly one of the greatest couples love hacks I could ever conjure up. And the rationale for it of not having to gaze into each other's eyes and to have a shared perspective for a moment. Yeah. And one of the things that I see screwing people's marriages so hard is that moment when one member of the couple has a legitimate grievance. They have something that needs to be heard. And then they say it so badly and they attack the character the other, therefore must apologize. And they never get that grievance heard because of the process. The way they articulated it was so bad. Yeah. They actually become the bad guy. And then they never get that important information or feedback really heard because they screwed up so hard.
And it ends up confirming. See, I can't be heard and understood. Oh, but it's like, but wait, let's back up and let's really talk about how, and I think we do it. It is a deep, fearful part of us that has probably at some time been deeply misunderstood. But then you're right out the gate, you create the conditions where you can't possibly be understood. I know there's so much responsibility on the person who's raising a concern.
In the skills, and I like that you refer to things as being skillful versus non-skillful versus right and wrong. Yeah. I think that's a very important differentiation. And you are clearly a sister in that you are such a fan of words and the accuracy of naming of things. Mm-hmm. And the name it to tame it, there's a version of it that was rendered to me many years ago by a wonderful psychiatrist, Hugh Rydell-Huber, who I don't know if this is true, but in terms of the quote in its source, because I couldn't find it, but he said that Confucius once said something to the effect of, all wisdom comes from the accuracy of naming things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. And so much of what you write about is there. But one of the things that you also talk about is no one has ever reasoned themselves into love. If she just will understand my thoughts in this way, and if she'll tell me I'm right and that she's wrong, I will get love. That does not work.
No. I think logic is so overrated, I think because so often when we're focusing on logic or explaining, what gets lost is the emotion underneath it. Yeah.
It's almost a bludgeoning too. It's like, I'm going to bludgeon you with logic and then you will love me, is something I come across from time to time. It's an important component, but boy, it's a misguided bug in our system, this erroneous conclusion that we come to of like, oh yeah, once she says I'm right and that she's wrong and she sees that my way is the right way, then I will be loved. That is not the algorithm. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking about when we were saying before about how you raise a concern matters, I feel like I spend a lot of time with women in my office, helping them, really inviting them to do a more vulnerable, more inviting startup. And I think that can be a hard sell because she's like, are you freaking kidding me? You're giving me more emotional labor to do. All I do is emotional labor, but it matters and it's what works. And then I think I spend a lot of time with men in my practice, especially very successful men, where they're paid big bucks to solve problems, to create order out of chaos. And then what's required in their marriages is like 180 degrees, which is just be, soften, open, put your hand on her foot, feed her words back to her. Empathy is your best move. It's like, are you freaking kidding me? This is not what culture has taught me to do. It's not what my work reinforces me for doing. So there's this oftentimes really different skill set that men need to be invited into that is highly effective, but not necessarily the knee jerk. Because you're right, explaining yourself to a partner or explaining a partner to a partner is really a road to nowhere. Yeah.
And it's slow work and the container has to be right. I mean, one of the things that you're talking about is that the thing that works in the boardroom does not work in the bedroom or in the house for that matter. And the skill of feeding back what you've heard, maybe one of the most important technological advances in couple therapy from where I sit, that speaks to our nervous system so well and allows us to feel a sense of cohesion. It doesn't have to be agreement, but there's cohesiveness. I, at the very least, am understood in this moment. And it also requires that the timing be right, because one of the things that I see for many couples is they speak during non-office hours and they expect for something to happen and it's not the right time. There's so many things that are required for this container.
Yeah.
And one of those ingredients is timing. The other one is attunement that you were just talking about, and that listening, that deep listening, saying, I hear you, and I'm not even going to editorialize and say anything beyond what you just said.
Yeah. Boy, that timing thing matters. You know, I call it going meta, talking about talking. Todd always says, are you available for some feedback? Are you in a place where you can hear some feedback? I totally appreciate that.
1,000,000%. That's so good.
Oh, I appreciate it so much because then I know to take a deep breath, drop my shoulders, remember that he's got my back, remember that he's my person, you know, knowing that whatever he's about to share with me may not feel good, but he's saying it in the name of love, all this stuff. That readying the other matters so, so much. And then if we say, are you available for some feedback or can we have a conversation? And if I check in with myself and I'm actually not, because A, I'm about to go do something else. B, I'm already feeling self-critical. So whatever you're going to say, I'm going to distort anyways. Then I can say, no, not right now. And then I'm in charge of finding a time. I think that's such a simple skill that couples can implement. Harville Hendricks calls it making appointments with each other. And I think that's a lovely, really important practice. We ought to be doing it with our kids for sure as well. With our kids, with our partners.
I'm so glad you mentioned Harville's name. He's contributed so mightily to moving the ball downfield for the betterment of couples. One of my absolute favorites in that idea of setting that appointment and really engaging in it. Listener, it's called Imago Therapy. He wrote a book called Getting the Love You Want, and he's been on the podcast a couple times. He's probably been on yours. He's just unbelievable. Such a big deal as far as I'm concerned. And I love that. I love meeting a legitimate love geek. You're the real deal. One of the other ways that you've provided gifts through naming and just, oh my God, the storytelling and just your ability to really land heady concepts and make them immediately usable and understandable and just, wow, there's nothing far out or difficult that you throw down. It's all really accessible. One of the things that you also say is that there is no failed relationship. Can you share with the listener your thoughts on relationship endings and how you perceive them? Yeah.
I am a couple therapist and I love helping people make their relationships work, but I spend a lot of time talking about dating and about breakups as sort of like bookends of relational life. And I think our field, just to be super nerdy for a minute, our field has done us dirty because in the field of couple therapy for a long time in the research, a divorce at the end of a couple therapy course was considered a treatment failure.
Right.
And so the field, has had to rethink what that means. Because I know in my practice, I'm sure you have had this too, sometimes a divorce that is done with tenderness, with care, with an intention to make as small blast radius as possible, that is a success. A good ending can be a success. And so there's a cultural stigma against divorce that I think a lot of us in our field have been trying to push back against to really normalize divorce. If half the population experiences something, it can't possibly be abnormal, which doesn't mean we ought to be like celebrating it or hoping for it, but we certainly ought to meet divorces and breakups as endings rather than failures. And for anybody who wants to love again, which I would hope that people would love again after a breakup or a divorce, if you view the last one as a failure, then you're setting yourself up to blame the other person for the failure. And then you're going to just kind of keep repeating. So to view a relationship ending as a completion, okay, now you're primed to look at the story of the relationship, to glean the lessons, to figure out your contribution to the dynamics and the cycles, to put yourself on a path of healing so that if and when you open your heart up again, you are well positioned to create a different kind of opportunity and connection with the next person. And it's not just about picking the right person. It's about continuing to become the right person.
I love that. And I think of it almost as music that we hear in our head after we've listened to it. And if the after image of our relationship is it was a failure, and that is the music that we're listening to and the song lyrics that we hardwire into our system, it sets us up for future failures versus that relationship came to completion and putting that on loop. But if we go in with my last relationship was a failure, it begets more failure. Attribution, we're such meaning-based creatures. We're not just Homo sapiens, we're Homo symbolicus. We seek meaning. If the meaning that we basically construe about that relationship was it was a failure, I believe that we are primed, therefore, to have it rather than, and I think that's such a gift that you gave the reader of like, it came to completion. Yeah. That relationship is complete.
Yeah. It's also a gift to give to your kids if there were kids in that marriage, right? Because we know the kids of divorce have some additional baggage. When I teach my college students, we talk about the impact of divorce on kids longer term. And so for kids to be able to look at their parents' divorce as a completion, not a failure, then also primes them to feel like they could tool themselves with what they need to create healthy relationships.
Yeah. My gosh, I feel like I'm a kid at a candy store talking with you, but I'm going to ask you, is there anything I should have asked but haven't yet asked before I get to my final question?
No, I've loved this conversation. When you were on my show, I came away from that conversation like, oh my gosh, I just felt so full in my heart and in my brain. So that's the way I feel again.
What an honor, because I've been such a fan of you for years. Spoiler alert, she may be coming back to talk about female sexuality at some point, which will be so amazing. But my final question for now. If you had the magical powers to confer upon all humanity one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the life of the individual, but since we're all connected, the people around that individual as well would probably be positively impacted, what would that insight or skill be? And how do you imagine the individual and perhaps those around them would be impacted?
Okay, well, it makes me a little bit tearful. It would be the ability to take ourselves lightly.
You're speaking to my soul. Okay, that is my work. Go, keep going.
I think especially those of us who do this work, who are drawn to your show, who are drawn to my show, we can get so heavy with all of it, and we want to unpack and understand and implement. And I think sometimes we have to just freaking laugh at ourselves and just be like, oh, WTF, and then just go out for a swim.
Yes. Totally. 1,000,000%. Yes. Alexandra, it has been absolutely a delight to be with you. Thank you so much for blessing my podcast and my listeners with your wisdom. And again, I can't reiterate it enough. Geek out to her work. It's just going to make you happier and just a better person. And we're all working to better ourselves. And if there's no betterment that can happen, I think more effectively than how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others. And your book is all about that, whether you're in the context of an actual relationship right now, or even if you're going solo. presently, this is the medicine. So thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Adam.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsay thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.